Okay, so we are starting our second spotlight conversation for the series of PLOS ONE Lab Protocols associated to a protocol in protocols.io. And we are really pleased to have Dr. Dennehy and Dr. Trujillo with us, who are authors of this paper and protocol that has received a lot of attention from the press as well. So to begin with, I would like either of you to tell us a little bit about what the protocol, or in this case, protocols are about, how to use it, and why they are relevant.
Do you want me to take a stab at that, Monica? So the story kind of began back in 2020 when New York was experiencing, the first wave of this coronavirus pandemic. I was casting around for ideas of how I could use my skills as a virologist to help my city. Monica happened to email me this paper from this group in Netherlands that had used, they had detected SARS coronavirus in wastewater. I thought it was a fantastic idea and it's something that we should try. So we reached out to the local authorities and we got a source of wastewater, and we were wondering, how do we detect SARS coronavirus in the wastewater? So I fell back on my experience as a bacteriophage biologist, and what we would do is occasionally we would try to isolate new phages. One of the best sources to isolate new phages from wastewater. So we decided to try the same protocol that we used for phage DNA extraction to extract RNA, and that's basically the fundamental protocol that we use to for the experiment that we describe in PLOS. It's based on polyethylene glycol precipitation of the phages in the environmental wastewater source, and then following that, we used Trujillo to extract the the virus RNA from the precipitated, I don't know what you want to call it. It's a kind of a gunk in the bottom of the tube, right? The pellet, right? So Trujillo is actually kind of an old school technique. It's based on phenylchloroform extraction. Most people these days will use a column where they just apply the sample to the column, and then it sticks to this resin, and then you wash it by adding the buffers, and then you extract the DNA using an elution buffer, which is ethanol, basically. But we went back to the old school method because we didn't want to clog the column with all the junk that we extracted from the wastewater. So the Trujillo avoids that. We just add the Trujillo to our sample, and it separates it into multiple layers, which we can then extract the RNA in the aqueous layer. And it's a little old school, but I think it worked more successfully for us than the comparable column-based extraction.
I think that it also reflects, I think, two things. One, that, for example, myself, I don't have a background in virology, and I started working here to try to detect the signal, and I kind of brought with me the need to make the protocol as easy as possible, starting for me, right? Because I wasn't a virologist who had been doing this in advance and who could, kind of rely on my past experience. So I think that one thing that made the protocol so successful was that we had a combination of somebody like me who could be anybody else who was trying for the first time to isolate RNA viruses, as opposed to people who had more experience, like John, who is a virologist. And then at that time, there were a lot of problems with supplies, but Trujillo was easy to get. And so really, we were not slowed down in our effort to detect the genetic signal. Actually, I think that we strongly benefit from using a relatively low-tech approach, right? I think it's fair to give recognition to somebody in our team, Zach, who it's an expert in Trisol, and he is like a machine who can do it over and over and get excellent results. So I think there were probably three things. They need to create a protocol that will allow me, that was extremely interested in finding a solution, to learn fast, to the curve, to kind of hit the ground running, and then being able to overcome the supplies limitations, and having somebody in the team that was really an expert in Trisol extractions.
Thank you so much for elaborating, Monica, because I was thinking as well whether part of the reasoning behind that, once you mentioned, of developing and optimizing the protocol, was considering the financial factors of having a constricted line of supply. But you already responded to that question. So once the protocol was ready and was working, I don't know if you could tell us what the motivation for having it peer-reviewed was. Why not to stop? Because it entails additional work, right? Why not to stop just at, we have the protocol, we can share it in the platform. Why go the extra mile and have it peer-reviewed?
I think, there's a lot of value in peer review in that you have someone else vouch for that protocol. And, I think that the motivation for us was to publish it, to share it with a broader audience. At the time we published it, there were many different methods of doing the same thing. And one of the issues, I think, and this still kind of tends to be an issue, is that different methods give you different data, and there needs to be more standardization. And I think the CDC recognizes that and is starting this national wastewater surveillance system. And one of the ideas behind that is to the CDC is going to now try to establish common protocols that everyone will use. And it's not just for SARS coronavirus, but they're also developing like a common protocol for monkeypox and a common protocol for polio. And by doing this, establishing this common protocol, it gives it a better baseline to compare data from different locations. So if one protocol was to be much more efficient at extracting virus RNA from wastewater than another, then it's kind of hard to compare the signal from two different locations if they're using different methods. So the publication was kind of an effort to share our good results, which we thought were very effective at extracting the RNA, but also to help people to coalesce around a single strategy that would be most effective.
Yeah, I think that we had two main reasons to publish. One was because our group participated in a paper where we are not authors, but you can find us, where it was, I think, I don't remember who did it, but they sent wastewater to many labs across the country, exactly the same, and different groups follow their protocol and then reported the results. So at the time that we were working on our protocol, we participated in this paper and our results were very good. So we felt that our protocol had passed one hurdle, right? It was worth sharing because of that. And then the second thing was that we work very close with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection in developing the protocol for them, and then helping them to adapt it. And so we felt that, we wanted to be as detailed and careful in our details for the protocol. And then we felt, well, it will validate our protocol if we publish it and we there are reviews on what we are proposing. So there were quite a few reasons, I think.
Thank you. And just building up on that, I don't know if you could share with us a little bit more of the value that you received from the reviewers' feedback. How did they shape the final product that you end up publishing?
I think that any time as a scientist that you want to communicate your findings, it is immense the benefit that comes from peer review, right? The comments are not always welcome, but I think that we all have to agree that it makes the communication better, right? And especially with these protocols where, it was kind of a new field, wastewater surveillance. There were a lot of issues, as we said, in terms of supplies, in terms of money, in terms of time constraints. So the feedback that we received from the reviewers, I think, help us to make the protocol easier to follow, right? We were also lucky that we had a lot of people who wrote directly to us after the protocol was published and said, we are following and this is happening. Can you help us? And we obviously did it. But I think if we cannot be in peer review, probably we would have to do a lot more of that, because communication is a two-way street. So if you get feedback, in general, it only makes it better.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to shift gears a little bit and go a little bit into more technical details of the protocol itself. So I would like to know if there's anything during the optimization of the protocol that didn't work and didn't make it to the final version of the protocol. Were there things that you tried over and over again and realized that you had to go a different route?
I remember we tried the skim milk. I'm not sure how well that worked, right, Monica? So there's an alternative method involving skim milk, and we had tried that, and I do believe we included that in the paper, right?
Yes.
And it wasn't as effective as PEG precipitation.
Yeah.
Also, I think we compared the column with the Trujillo, right? And I think the Trujillo was more effective, right?
Yeah. I also think that we did some trials with different denaturing lengths at one point. We denature a little bit more than 60 minutes, a little bit less, and 60 an hour was the best thing, and so we kept it like that. I do remember that we found out that for people who had experience, quote unquote, seeing the pellet was easy, but for most people it wasn't. And that's when we decided to include a dye, and that's that little video that shows where the pellet is, that I think it was helpful. Because that was something that we learned from people who tried to follow the protocol. We shared it before it was published, and people would say, well, how do you know that you are resuspending the pellet or not, because we don't know what it is. And so that helped us to, I think it helped us to identify a crucial point in the protocol. Yeah, those are the things that I can think of. There were some issues also with the tubes that were used for centrifugation. And that was, again, it had a lot to do with supply, because John's lab happened to have a type of tube that performed very well. And then we tried to switch it to the regular Falcon tubes, and we didn't get good results at the beginning, so we needed to go back to the other tubes.
There was another fortuitous, I don't know, outcome that we tested, and that was testing the effect of pasteurization. So as a condition to bring the wastewater into the laboratory, we needed to inactivate any pathogens in the wastewater before anyone could handle it. We weren't sure at that time whether the wastewater contained infectious coronavirus, but we knew even if there was not infected coronavirus, there's still a lot of other, pathogens in wastewater that you don't want to deal with. Luckily, we found that when we pasteurized the wastewater, we actually were able to better recover the SARS coronavirus than the unpasteurized wastewater. That have turned out well for us. We were afraid that the pasteurization would reduce our success, but on the other hand, it actually increased it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing these insights, because I think they're going to be very useful for future users. And I would also like to know if, since publication, you have had to do any troubleshooting, and if so, what have you found out, and what were the causes, or the reasons for which you had to troubleshoot?
Well, so, one thing that we established a protocol, we didn't stop there. We continued to tinker with stuff and to try to improve our result. I guess the most dramatic thing was my postdoc kind of invented a new way to concentrate viruses. So the step where we add the polyethylene glycol salt is to precipitate the viruses and then to allow it to pack them in the centrifuge. What he did was to develop what he called a passive in situ virus concentration device. And this eliminates the need for an auto sampler to take samples of the wastewater from the treatment plant, and also to eliminate the need for the PEG, precipitation, and the centrifuging. So the device is actually just a small thing that we can toss into the plant wastewater, leave it there for 24 hours, come back later, pull it out, and then extract the RNA directly from that, which saves us considerable labor and eliminates the need for expensive machinery like the centrifuge and the auto sampler. And this is always something that's in the back of our mind, is to make this protocol more cost effective for any kind of entity that want to implement a monitoring program, not just here in the United States, but also in the developing countries that actually have the most serious issues with pathogenic diseases.
And I think that something that we were aware, I don't want to say at the beginning, but relatively fast, was that the problem in wastewater is that what you have can be very diluted. So the approach that we use and publish, that it's to create that pellet by the combination of treating the wastewater with PEG and sodium chloride, you are limited to a volume that you can centrifuge, right? So we centrifuge for 2 hours at a relatively high speed. And as John said it, not everybody has access to that type of centrifuge. And if the signal becomes lower, then it could be that you need to centrifuge a much bigger volume. And then access to the centrifuge is going to be even more restrictive. So yes, so that was what was in the mind of our colleague, Sharon Cannoli, who came up with a really very good idea to think about a different strategy, that is to do the concentration in situ, and so also decrease the chances of exposure to pathogenic organisms for the people who are doing the work.
And are there any other steps that you have optimized in the protocol since publication?
I think we have.
So.
I think we have done a better job with the removal of inhibitors, because inhibitors in wastewater are an important problem, right? And Trisol, it's not horrible, but the use of some inhibitors, removal solutions, it's useful. It is definitely useful.
So can you elaborate a little bit more on how you remove the inhibitors now?
So what we are using is Promega has a solution that is specifically designed for removal of, not Promega, Simo, for removal of inhibitors. And the wastewater community is kind of using it in general, because sometimes you get away with it, but some other times, like in our case, we also were from the very beginning very interested in using the RNA that we isolated for doing sequencing. So that was something else that we needed to perfect. The protocol allows us not only to detect, but also to do sequencing. So it worked. But there was, as the signal became lower, right, then you need to be more aware of other problems that you can have. And inhibitors are a problem when you are working with wastewater.
And then in addition to this step with the inhibitors, are there any other steps that are very critical or tricky, and in which the users of the protocol have to be particularly careful or really follow what the protocol says?
I think setting up the RNA reactions is probably a step that's easy to make mistakes. So many times you have to use a 96 well or 48 well plate, and the reaction reagents need to be added to each well. Like if you're not using a robot, obviously, if you have a technician that's doing it, it's easy for them to cross-contaminate between wells. And this is somewhat of a problem that we've had, is that sometimes our negative control would show up as positive because most likely, you know, there was a little cross-contamination. So one of our employees had really good hands and really good focus and concentration. We had her set up our plates every week because, you know, she was very consistent, very meticulous about doing this. And, you know, one of the judges of how accurate the pipetting and plate setup was to, you need to generate a standard curve, which is based on, you know, a serial dilution of a standard. And there's a 10-fold serial dilution, and then it plotted out, and then it gives you an R-square value. The relationship between the expected value and the observed value. Kristen, the technician, would often get a perfect score. She would get, you know, so precise that there was a perfect correlation between the observed and the expected. And even, you know, the robot couldn't do as well as her. So that was the one step that was really is kind of tricky.
Yeah, I think that also the visualization of the pellet, so you would dissolve, add the lysis buffer or Trisol in our case to the right part of the tube was important. Like people who were not used to follow that protocol at the beginning, they weren't thinking about it, and so they will get a very low recovery because they were not actually following the protocol exactly to really suspend the virus. I think that's probably one of the crucial steps in the protocol that we published. That is that, you know, you have a big tube and the pellet is small. And so if you are not paying it and you resuspend with a small volume, right? So you need to really pay attention that you are resuspending it well. the pellet sticks to the wall. So unless you, actually vortex a little bit, you will not get it into solution. And therefore your yield is going to be really low.
Okay. Thank you so much. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we know that your protocol, both the paper and the protocol itself, have both received a lot of attention from the press. So I would like to know if you can tell us how the publication of these articles have impacted your careers.
It definitely put it more on the map. I was kind of laboring away in obscurity when I worked on bacteriophages because not too many people in the general population have very much of an interest in that. But now my mother proud of me because I was on the front page of the New York Times not too long ago. So she's like, "Good job, John." So, one positive benefit of this whole experience.
Yeah, for me, it's the same, added with the fact that I am originally from a small country in Latin America. So it made me very famous in my country of origin. So
well, congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
And just now to wrap up, if there's anything that I didn't ask and you would like to mention, I will be really happy for you to do so.
I think that something that I liked a lot about publishing the protocol is to not only share our protocol, but also this idea that it's transparent, that the scientific community is willing to share the tools that a particular group develop and to put it in as a common good, right? And you are running a risk because obviously, well, people can, I don't know, make it so much better than you, and then you are like, oh my God, why did I share or whatever? But I think it represented, or it represents for me what I like about science, that is having the opportunity to share your results and to be judged by others trying to reproduce what you are thinking it's a good tool. So I enjoy that very much.
So one thing I really that touched me was, I'm not sure, it might have been you, but someone tweeted about this paper being a really great example of open access, open data. And I strongly believe in those principles. And I'm just happy that that's being recognized, is that, that there's value in sharing and making things open access.
Yeah, I think that's the best that science can give. And it's not always easy to do it. So I'm happy about having done it.
Thank you so much, both Monica and John, for sharing with us your thoughts and giving us the opportunity to go deeper into the execution and the problems associated with the protocol and how to solve them and the critical steps, and also on your broad take on sharing and open access and reproducibility. So,
yeah, and perhaps one thing that I miss at least is that this was a great example of a teamwork, because this protocol is the product of John's experience and the training that he has done in his lab, because it was people from his lab who work together with me, who was, I had zero background in virology, or very little. And so each one of us came to the table with their skills and their lack of skills, if you want to call it. And as a result of being a real team effort, I think that it really became a good protocol. It's just, many names, but it represents what really happened in this lab, that we were working together for one goal, that was to detect the signal.
Well, thank you so much. I'll let you go. Won't take more of your time, but I'm really pleased that we have this conversation.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you so
thank
much.
you.
Have a great
Thank
time.
you. Yes.
Enjoy the rest of your week.
Yeah, you too. Bye.